It wasn't a king. It wasn't a pope, and it wasn't the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. In the 16th century, as Europe bled from religious wars and monarchs fought over crumbling thrones, one man ruled from the shadows of both East and West, a man whose signature meant life or death, whose armies crushed kingdoms, not just in battlefields, but in the minds of those who dared oppose him. He commanded not just warriors, but poets, architects, and spies. He didn't inherit a throne. He built an empire of fear, loyalty, and law. From the palaces of Istanbul to the walls of Vienna, whispers of his name struck fear even in the bravest generals. His reach spanned 3 continents. His heart, a battlefield of love and betrayal. And yet, many today don't even know his name. But this isn't just history. This is the rise of the most powerful sultan the world has ever seen. And once you enter his world, there is no turning back. He was born in 1494, under a blood moon. The empire was vast, already feared, but restless. And somewhere deep inside the stone walls of Trabzon, near the edge of the Black Sea, a boy was born, destined to become something more than a ruler. His name was Suleiman. He was no ordinary prince. By the age of 7, he was already learning Persian poetry, swordsmanship, and the secrets of power. But make no mistake, this was no fairy tale education. Ottoman politics was soaked in blood. The empire had one rule: only the strong survive. Suleiman knew, from the moment he could walk, that even his brothers could become enemies. That mercy was not a royal virtue. It was a weakness. So he hardened, not just his sword arm, but his mind. When his father, Sultan Selim I, known as Selim the Grim, died in 1520, Suleiman ascended the throne at the age of 26. Most rulers spend years consolidating power. Suleiman needed none of that. He walked into the palace as if it was already his tomb, and his throne, his weapon. But what no one expected was how long he would stay on that throne. For 46 years, longer than any sultan in Ottoman history, Suleiman ruled with a mind sharper than any blade in his arsenal. But what made him terrifying wasn't just the battles he won. It was the silence before them. He didn't rage. He calculated. He didn't demand loyalty. He commanded it. To the west, he became known as Suleiman the Magnificent, a title whispered in fear and awe across European courts. To the east, they called him Kanuni, the lawgiver, because Suleiman didn't just wage wars. He wrote laws, reformed the courts, redefined justice. He turned a brutal empire into a machine, not just of conquest, but of order. And he did it all while walking a thin, invisible line between absolute power and total collapse. His enemies underestimated him. His allies envied him. And the world slowly began to orbit around his will. But behind the gold, the glory, and the empire that stretched across 3 continents was a man with a secret, a side of Suleiman the world wasn't ready to see. A heart, beating, not just for empire, but for a woman. And that, in the Ottoman Empire, was more dangerous than war. Because when love enters the game of power, blood always follows. By the time Suleiman sat on the throne, the empire he inherited was already massive. But to him, it wasn't enough. He didn't just want to rule. He wanted to redefine the edges of the world. And so, like a shadow stretching across the earth, Suleiman moved. First came Belgrade, a city thought to be untouchable, fortified, defended by Europe's finest knights. But in 1521, Suleiman's army surrounded it, not with reckless rage, but with mathematical precision. They cut the water. They starved the people. And when the walls finally crumbled, they didn't just take the city. They sent a message: no fortress is safe. Then came Rhodes. The Knights Hospitaller had held it for over 200 years. A Christian stronghold, an island drenched in holy war. But Suleiman, he didn't see holiness. He saw a choke point, a gate between east and west. So he besieged it for 6 brutal months. And when it fell, Europe began to panic. Because this wasn't just conquest. This was strategy. Cold, ruthless, relentless. But Suleiman wasn't done. In 1526, he crushed the Hungarian army at Mohacs. In a battle so violent, the king, Louis II, was found drowned in a swamp. still wearing his crown. Hungary was shattered, its royal bloodline extinct. And Suleiman, he marched through the ashes, planting the Ottoman flag where Christian kings once knelt. Baghdad fell. So did Tabriz. So did North Africa. And then he turned to the sea. While most sultans feared the ocean, Suleiman mastered it. He rebuilt the Ottoman navy into a terrifying force. Hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, all loyal to one name. He forged an alliance with the infamous pirate Barbarossa and turned him into an admiral. And with that, Suleiman controlled the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and even reached into the Persian Gulf. Trade routes bent to his will. Cities surrendered before a single cannon fired. Because when an empire can strike from land and sea, resistance becomes suicide. By the mid-1500s, his empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, from Algiers to Mecca, from Crimea to Sudan. 3 continents, 25 million people, all under the seal of one man. But power like this isn't clean. It doesn't grow in daylight. It spreads in silence, in whispers, in betrayal. Behind every victory, there were executions. Behind every treaty, secret blood pacts. And behind every city Suleiman conquered was a battlefield soaked in more than just blood. It was soaked in fear. Fear of the man who never blinked. The man who never stopped moving. The man who made emperors flinch and popes lose sleep. But for Suleiman, this wasn't glory. It wasn't pride. It was destiny. He believed deeply that he had been chosen by God to bring order to a chaotic world. And if that meant burning cities to the ground, so be it. Because in the mind of Suleiman, peace wasn't something you negotiated. It was something you enforced. With armies, with navies, with laws written in stone and fire. But even as his empire grew to monstrous proportions, there was one war Suleiman hadn't won. A war raging inside the palace walls. Because while he ruled 3 continents with an iron fist, back home, in the harem, a different power was rising, one he could not control. By now, you know Suleiman the warrior, the conqueror, the shadow that swept across continents. But the truth is swords rust, empires fall, and armies vanish into dust. What remains is the law, and Suleiman knew this better than anyone, because while his enemies were obsessed with walls and cannons, Suleiman was crafting something far more dangerous, a system that would outlive them all. He called it canon, his own body of secular laws, written alongside the religious code of Islam. It was clean, precise, cold as stone. These were not just rules. They were weapons of order. Before Suleiman, the Ottoman legal system was a tangle of interpretations, corrupted judges, and chaotic enforcement. After him, it was an empire of control. Criminal law, tax law, land reform, rights of merchants, peasants, and soldiers. Nothing was above the law, except him. But Suleiman didn't just write these laws. He lived them, enforced them. Even his own son was not immune. And when justice came knocking, it knocked loud. But the law wasn't the only legacy he built in silence. In the heart of Istanbul, he raised something eternal. Not a palace, not a fortress, but mosque, the Suleimani Mosque. It wasn't just a building. It was a statement, etched in marble and domes, built by Mimar Sinan, the greatest architect in Ottoman history. This mosque wasn't just a place to pray. It was a university, a hospital, a soup kitchen, a city within a city, built to heal, educate, and feed. While Europe was tearing itself apart in religious wars, Suleiman was building sanctuaries for science, art, and learning. He surrounded himself with poets, philosophers, architects who could carve stories into stone. While kings in Europe fought to silence thinkers, Suleiman paid them, not because he was kind, but because he was strategic. He knew, a ruler who fears knowledge doesn't last long. But perhaps the most terrifying part of all is how Suleiman negotiated peace. He didn't bow to European monarchs. He wrote to them as equals. To Francis I of France, he offered an alliance, not from weakness, but from strength. A Muslim sultan and a Christian king against the Holy Roman Emperor. This wasn't diplomacy. It was geopolitical chess. And Suleiman, He was always 10 moves ahead. He spoke not just in cannon fire, but in letters, in laws, in marble. And that's what made him unstoppable. Because even if you could defeat his armies, how do you kill an idea, a vision? How do you destroy a ruler who fights with both the sword and the scripture? While the world watched his battles, he was rewriting history. And even now, centuries later, his laws, the canon, still echo through modern Turkish law. His mosque still stands. His name still divides historians between admiration and fear. But what none of them knew was that the greatest battle of Suleiman's life was not fought with armies, but with love. Because back in the palace, a woman was watching, plotting, rising, and she would become the most powerful empress the empire would ever know. Her name was Hurrem. For years, the world saw Suleiman as untouchable, a sultan of steel, an emperor who ruled with reason, not emotion. But in the heart of the harem, he broke the oldest law of the Ottoman Empire. A sultan must never fall in love. Her name was Hurrem. She was a slave, a nobody, stolen from Eastern Europe, sold into the palace like cattle. But she didn't beg. She observed. She learned the language of power and whispered her way into the sultan's heart. Other concubines came and went, but Hurrem stayed. She laughed with him, debated philosophy, even challenged his decisions. And slowly, she became more than a lover. She became his equal. And then, he did the unthinkable. He freed her, married her, gave her the title of Hasiki Sultan, something no woman before her had ever held. But while love bloomed behind golden doors, outside, the palace boiled. Because Suleiman already had a son, Prince Mustafa, born of another woman, raised as the heir, loved by the people, respected by the army. He was everything an empire could want in a future sultan, which made him everything Hurrem feared. What happened next remains one of the darkest turns in Ottoman history. Whispers began, rumors of rebellion, letters real or forged that claimed Mustafa was planning to overthrow his father. And Hurrem, with her network of spies, allies, and secrets, stood just far enough away to keep her hands clean. But the doubt had already infected Suleiman's heart. And one day, in the cold air of a military campaign, he summoned his son. Mustafa walked into the tent, unarmed, unaware. He bowed to his father, and within moments, the guards closed in. Suleiman didn't look away, didn't flinch, as they strangled his son in front of him, not with a sword, not with fire, but with silence and silk. It was tradition, it was law, but it was also murder. That moment shattered something inside Suleiman. The empire didn't see it, but behind the grand ceremonies and perfect laws, he was no longer whole. The price of love had been his own blood. And Hurrem, she stayed by his side until her death, never crowned an empress, but more powerful than any queen. Their love story changed the empire forever, but it came at a cost that no law, no army, no god could ever undo. History remembers many sultans. Mehmed II, the conqueror, who broke the walls of Constantinople and turned the ancient world upside down. Suleiman I, the Grim, who doubled the empire in just 8 years through blood and fire. But Suleiman did something no one else could. He didn't just expand the empire. He refined it. He took what others built with swords and shaped it with vision. Under his rule, the Ottoman Empire reached its greatest size, stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa. But size was never his true weapon. It was control. Military, legal, cultural. He could command fleets on 3 seas, and in the same breath, rewrite the laws of millions. He could level cities, and then fund their rebuilding with poetry and stone. He didn't just conquer land. He conquered time. Even centuries later, his laws, the canon, still whisper through modern courts. His mosques still pierce the skyline of Istanbul. His name still sends shivers through the pages of both Western and Eastern history books. Because unlike most rulers, Suleiman became a myth while still alive. To the West, he was the Magnificent, a warrior philosopher whose name echoed through Vatican halls. To the East, he was the lawgiver, a guardian of justice, and at times, its executioner. And to history, he is something more terrifying. The standard, the one all sultans after him were compared to, and none could surpass. But his greatness wasn't clean. It came with a cost. A drowned king, a strangled prince, a love that rewrote tradition and burned every law it touched. Suleiman's empire no longer stands, but his shadow does. And maybe that's why, even today, when we speak of the most powerful man of his time, we don't speak of a king or a pope. We speak of a sultan,